We will glorify the King of Kings. We will glorify the Lamb. We will glorify the Lord of Lords, who is the great I am. Lord Jehovah reigns in majesty. We will bow before His throne. We will worship Him in righteousness. We will worship Him alone. He is Lord of heaven, Lord of earth. He is Lord of all who live. He is Lord of all the universe. All praise to Him we give. Hallelujah to the King of Kings. Hallelujah to the Lamb. Hallelujah to the Lord of Lords, who is the great I am.
Pray for please. Dearest Heavenly Father, thank you for this day. Thank you for this opportunity. Come here this midweek at a Bible study. Pray, Heavenly Father, everything is done here this evening for your sight. Pray, Heavenly Father, that you give each one of us as we enter into our Bible study and we have to go in with our hearts open, minds open as well. Take all the distraction from our lives, those behind us, put our focus solely on you. Please, Heavenly Father, give those who listen from us this evening as much over to them through sickness. Back to good health, do your will. Please be with us this hour of rejoicing in Christ's name.
All right. More here if anybody else needs one. All right, we're going to continue our study of the United Kingdom, and then we'll go into the Divided Kingdom when we get there. We did a little bit last week in our study looking at 8, 9, and 10 of 1 Samuel, looking at the request of the Israelites for a king and what led to the United Kingdom. We saw in that particular study, or that part of our study, choosing by God through Samuel of Saul to become king, and the process that he went through and the anointing, these things that happened in that life, and in that particular aspect of his life before he became I guess you might say, the full-blown king of Israel. And that kind of is where we're going tonight. We want to turn to First Samuel chapter number 11. We'll start with and just read that so we'll have a foundation for the questions that we'll be discussing here in just a few minutes. First Samuel chapter 11. David, you want to start for us?
Until the heat of the day, the king was mad because they should find standards of the food or not let to know. And the people said unto Samuel, Here is he that said, Shall Saul reign over us? Bring him in, that we may put him to death. And Saul said, There shall not a man be put to death this day, for today the Lord hath brought salvation in Israel. Then said Samuel to the people, Come and let us go to Gilgal, and renew the kingdom there. And all the people went to Gilgal, and there they made Saul king before the Lord of Gilgal. And there they sacrificed sacrifices of peace offerings before the Lord, and there Saul and all the men of Israel were listening.
Very good. Thank you very much. All right, first question there we got. Who were the Ammonites? They were the ones that were coming in against Jabesh Gilead. Let's give a little background on who they are. Genesis chapter 19, verse number 38. Is that Trina?
The younger also bore a son and called his name Ammon. He is the father of Ammonites this day.
We find there where the Ammonites came from. If you go back and you look at the context of what that particular verse is, that's the story of the escape of Lot from Sodom and Gomorrah after he had fled and his wife had been consumed or turned into a pillar of salt. They'd gone to the city. The older and the younger daughter get together, and they determined that their father's not going to have any lineage, and so they have an incestuous relationship with Lot. And both the daughters have a son, and that second the youngest one's child is the father of the Ammonites. So that's where it comes from. How would you look at that, or what might be described as the relationship to the Jews? Is there a relationship to the Jews with the Ammonites? Well, let's see. What was Lot's relationship to Abraham? Nephew? I think it was. He was a nephew. So that, in some form or fashion, I wouldn't know. You start getting after first cousins. I can't follow it anyway. But somewhere on the tree of Abraham, or up above Abraham, they were kin. Like 57th cousin or something. But the Ammonites came from the relationship that the daughter of Lot, where she had an incestuous relationship with him, came out of a wicked situation right there. And so, just to give you a little background of what they are, right, or what that is right there. Question number 2. How would you describe the nature of the Ammonites? Verse number 2, and I also had down there, I had seen a reference for them in Amos chapter 1 and verse number 13, talk about the Ammonites there. Verse number 2 says, And Nahash and the Ammonite answered them, On this condition I will make a covenant with you, that I may thrust out all your right eyes, and lay it for a reproach upon all Israel. Somebody got Amos chapter 1, 13? Amos chapter 1, verse 13. Yes, sir.
This says the Lord for transgressions of the Ammonites and for war. I will not revoke punishment because they had open pregnant women and guilt together, that they might enlarge their border.
All right, so they were guilty of going in and killing pregnant women, basically is what it was, destroying them, having no mercy or anything in the battles that they had and that sort of thing. So the question is, how would you describe the nature of the Ammonites, based upon what we know? They were not very good people. They were wicked, mean people. All right, question number 3 says, What did the elders of the city of Jabesh Gilead desire to make with Nahash and the Ammonites? I think it had 2. All right, well, I just had the wrong reference there. They, the elders, requested of Nahash and the Ammonites that they would make a covenant with them. What is a covenant? All right, a pact, an agreement, treaty. All right. Chandler and I were talking about a paper that he was writing about Winston Churchill yesterday, talking about was the Prime Minister before him, Chamberlain, and how that they wanted to get rid of him because he wanted to appease the Nazis. He didn't want to stand up against them in World War II. Basically, what we're looking at here is that the Israelites were looking to appease or to make a treaty or a league with the enemies of God. And they were going to go so far as to allow them to pluck out one of their eyes as an insult to them and the nation of Israel in order to do that. How would we take and make that something that we could apply to ourselves as far as that goes? There's not anybody coming in to try to threaten us with an eye removal, but that does fit to some degree. Somebody comes in and we know that they're not good people and we know that they're not standing for the truth and we know that they're not doing what's right. Do we want to appease them and try to get along with them just for the sake of not dying?
But we still see it today. We see we can look at our own government and what we do in terms of do we manipulate how we worship God based off the spirit of our government might come in, shut us down, or tax us, or arrest us, or fine us, whatever you want to call it.
That's the thing. We see something that is threatening, causes us to be fearful. We seek solutions away from God rather than with God.
I think that we have to be very careful that we don't allow any one organization, institution, whatever it may be, to manipulate us as far as our worship and service to God. If we're not very careful, we can be bent or bowed down to where we don't do what we're supposed to do or act in the way that we're supposed to act because of the pressures that are put upon us. And it may be in the sense of an individual thing, and those that we are surrounded by at work or school or whatever it may be. But we have to be very careful because we can't make a treaty or an alliance or anything with people. We have to stand firm with what we know to be the truth, no matter what the circumstances may be. Anybody got anything else they'd like to add to that? Number 4, how long did Nahash allow the people to seek for someone to save them? Verse number 3. I think that's the reference right on that one. 7 days. The elders asked for 7 days. I thought it was kind of interesting the fact that here he's coming in and he's going to, he's got the upper hand, he's going to take them on, and he gives them 7 days to try to find somebody to come in and save them. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. He must have been pretty confident in what he was going to do. He must have really had the upper hand as far as the city or town was concerned. So he didn't think that anything would be there. What do we know about the children of Israel as far as the nation and the king? They had not really been established yet. The nation of Israel was still under the auspices of Samuel and Saul. They were transitioning from a theocracy that we talked about a couple of weeks ago into the monarchy, and so it had not been fully established. They didn't have the king sitting on the throne in Jerusalem and everything in the order that it would be as far as that goes. So the power, the military, and all that stuff had not been established yet. So realistically, Nahash and the Ammonites didn't feel threatened. They didn't think that Israel would be able to pull together enough to help them out anyway. So, go ahead and take your time and see if you can't find somebody to save you. So they send out the messengers to try to seek for help. Number 5, from verse 3, who did Jabesh Gilead seek help from? Who? Alright, man specifically. They sent out messengers into all the coast of Israel. Who did they not call up for help? God or Saul. Saul was the king, and they didn't even bother to call for Saul to come and rescue them, the king, because he was not fully established as far as the king. As a matter of fact, if you go back and you look at chapter number 10 and verse number 27 there, it says that, but the children of Belial said, how shall this man save us? And he despised him and brought him no presents, but he held his peace. So there are many that were in Israel that rejected Saul from being king. They were not going to have him to rule over them in the first place. It may be Jabesh Gilead was one of the outer reaches as far as the nation of Israel, so they may not have even known that they had a king at that point in the sense of sending to Saul for help. But they sent to all of Israel and didn't seek it from God. We have a tendency to try to find answers for ourselves as well in times of problem rather than seeking God and His answer to whatever might be the answer to our questions. Number 6, what was the reaction of the people concerning the message from Jabesh Gilead? Number 5, verse number 5. Weeping, all right? How do we react to problems? Sometimes we might weep. Sometimes we have fears. A lot of different emotional reactions to things that come upon us. That's human nature. Looks to me like a desperate situation anyway. Number 7, what did the Spirit of God produce in Saul at the hearing of the message? All right, he became angry. All right, it says there that God caused Saul to become angry. It was I don't know if you would call it, I guess it would have to be a blessing if God gave it to him in some form or fashion. He caused him to have a spirit to stand up or to react to it in some way, to take on the situation. Do we receive things like that from God today? Does God cause us to get angry?
Be angry and sin not.
Okay, we are commanded in the Scriptures to be angry and sin not. There is a righteous indignation. There's a righteous form of anger. How would we get that from God? God is not going to overwhelm us by some emotional or enlightening type of situation. How do we become righteously indignant or angry? All right, when we read in the Word and know that what the situation calls for is a form of anger or being upset about a situation, then we should be. God provides us the Bible so that we can know when we're supposed to be angry, when we're supposed to be sad, and when we're supposed to be happy. And all of our emotions are guided through the words of God if we'll let it be. Most of the time, and most people don't do it that way. I can raise my hand on that. Emotions, most of the time, with most people are what? Spur of the moment, or whatever the situation happens, then that emotion comes upon us. But the Bible is here, and it gives us the guidance for our emotions. It's just not a matter of telling us what our actions should be. It's a matter of showing us where we're supposed to go and how we're supposed to act and how we're supposed to deal with things in every aspect of our lives. And so when we say that, you make me mad, or I just blew up, then we're not using the Scriptures to guide our emotions the way that it's given for us to use that. Do you agree or disagree with that? Would you like to add something to it? Y'all are making me so mad you're not saying anything. But let's go on to number 8. What 2 things did Saul use to get the attention of the people concerning the need for their help? Verse number 7. 2 things that Saul used to get the attention of the people.
He took some oxen and chopped them up and sent them to all the coast of Israel and said, the message of regret.
All right.
I don't know if this is going to happen to your oxen. Okay.
So he used oxen to appeal to the people or to coerce the people into joining up with him and helping him in this cause. But he also used something else. It's not quite as evident. But he invoked the name of who? Samuel. He used the name of Samuel as an appeal or a calling to the people. Why would he say, you follow Saul and you follow Samuel? All right, so he was an authoritative figure in the sense that he had a connection with God, and his kingdom had not been established as far as his authority. Some people were refusing to be submitted to Saul, so he did not have full allegiance within the nation of Israel, but the people recognized the authority of Samuel and his connection to God, and so he used that as a means by which he could get the people to come and help him out.
Does that mean they respect Saul?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Number 9. Why did the people join in with Saul? All right, fear of the Lord. All right, so what did Saul threaten them with? Fear of losing their oxen or whatever it may be that they could bring upon them. But it was the understanding that they were doing something that needed to be done because of God, not necessarily because of Saul, that they responded in the way that they did. Sometimes we're called upon or by people to do things, and we do it not necessarily because of the people themselves, but because of the response that we do, or the result as far as glorifying God or doing the things that God would have us to do. And sometimes the people that are asking us to do it, maybe they're not even deserving of our help or whatever, but we do it because of our fear and our honor of God. And so we need to understand that we do that as opposed to just responding to what people call for us to do. But we have to look at the big picture in all the things we do. Number 10, what would we liken to this event in the church today? Can we draw a picture of what's happening here? If we say that in the Old Testament, the nation of Israel, the children of Israel, were the people of God, they represent in the Old Testament what the church represents today. Is there a picture that we could draw, or something we could see in that, in the sense of making it a figure or a likeness to what we deal with today, or what we might deal with today? Not necessarily talking about a specific thing, but I mean in general. Jabesh Gilead was a part of the nation of Israel. They were being attacked by the enemy. There was a call for help. Is there anything in the likeness of that would represent the church?
Happens all around the world in terms of Christianity is widely persecuted. Might not be so much in our area here, the southern part of the United States, but it is under attack in places around the world that needs our aid and our assistance.
Thinking about when this congregation was established and the thing that we went through as far as with the Jubilee, when they were trying to basically put the church in a treaty or a relationship with the Christian church, is about what it amounted to with a lot of things that were going on. And we stood up, the congregation of Robertson, standing up and putting the articles in the paper and trying to stop that. What happened there? We did, but what else actually? Besides time? You think about all the men coming from all the locations around the country that came here for the lectureship, that did things to help us as far as trying to defeat that. And eventually, with the Jubilee was shut down. Of course, liberalism has since then expanded, but that's not, it's not a centralized location or something to that effect. But, we had, on Labor Day weekend, we had 22 sessions going from Friday night to Monday night, with preachers consistently coming in and teaching about things and standing against the things that were being promoted by this group. I see that as something or somewhat like the situation there. The truth was being attacked and the stand was being made, and a lot of people joined in and worked together to fight against that. You don't see it as much nowadays. The church is so splintered in many ways over different things. But that idea is what we need to get back to as far as fighting the truth. We have to know the truth and understand the truth and support the truth and do our best to support those congregations that are doing the same thing. We need to be working with them to help them to fight in their locations as well and supporting them. One of the things that we talked about in the business meeting the other day was that we were wanting to try to put together something where we could work with several connections in the area as far as helping put together the young people and having some time to get together with them and to do some things connecting them so that we can try to build a church and support our young people wherever they may be. That idea is somewhat of that, because each congregation has an individual fight to try to hold on and to support and encourage the young people and the kids. And we try to do that, or want to try to do that in some way, form, or fashion with them. But we have to be careful with the truth and protect the truth first and foremost in whatever we do. think that's something along those lines, and fighting together to fight against the devil and the discouraging things that he does to try to drive people away from the church. Any comments about that? Number 11, how would the call to arms be done? If you could put a comparison between that situation and today or in the New Testament, how would a call be made? What did Saul do to call to arms Israel then? Cut up the oxen, sent it all through the nation of Israel, says, y'all get out here and help. We're going to go to war with the enemy. How would it be done today? We ain't got no oxen. Maybe you do, and I just don't know. But how do we call for help, Roy? If I need help, if we need help within the congregation, how do we do it? Ask God. Do it from the pulpit. Preaching the word. I think that we have to say, this is the situation and we need to be involved in this particular situation. This is the reason why, looking at the Bible, and let's all join hands or join arms and let's do what we can do to stop whatever needs to be done. It doesn't always go too smoothly because people are a little intimidated sometimes, and so you don't get the backing or the support that you would like to do like you did in this particular situation. But the call to arms is with the gospel. We are called to fight by the gospel. Even Paul used that particular analogy, talking about us being soldiers for Christ. We're called to fight the good fight of faith. And so that's the way that it's done. You cannot expect to be called in some form or fashion. People talk about the calling of God in some dream or voice or whatever it may be. It's not going to happen that way. We understand that. But we do need to understand that there is a calling that we get through the gospel to fight with one another for a cause. We need to be aware of that. When we see a cause, we need to bring the message out to try to help people out. How many soldiers were enlisted by Saul on this occasion? 330,000. It's interesting to note here that 300,000 were from Israel and 30,000 were from Judah. What are we studying in this particular study right here? The United Kingdom. It was not divided up into Israel and Judah at this time. Wonder why it was noted that way. Don't know. Don't know. But 330,000. How long did they have to put this army together? A week. All right, so they got this army together, 330,000, got them armed, and got them down to the point where they had to engage in the fight within a week's time. Does that tell us anything? God was with them. All right. If we have an engagement that we have with the enemy, how long does it take us to get together? Huh? 3 years. Yeah. Let's put a committee on that and see what we can do. We need to understand that we're in the good fight of faith and that we need to move rapidly to fight the enemy as much as we can. We don't need to be dilly-dallying around, and if we will put our hearts into it and pray to God for help, then He can help us to get things done quickly and efficiently and with the right results, because we're fighting for God and for the good of the church.
He tells us that he lifted up the people and him and saw that Israel could go out and overcome.
Yeah. Military, 330,000 soldiers moving. How long would it take to move them?
I mean, that's still, even modern days, that takes weeks.
Yeah.
Weeks.
Yeah.
It's hard to put the two of them together.
Tell the parts where you're going. Put them
miraculous situation, to say the least. I think that the story is telling us that we need to be aware of the fact that when God is involved in it, that things can be accomplished in a quick way. If everybody will step up and do what they're supposed to do or what they can do to help that in whatever it may be. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a doctrinal fight that we're talking about. We're talking about a work of the Lord in some form or fashion that's trying to move the cause forward. And so we need to be very careful that we don't sell ourselves short because God is with us if we know that we're doing the right thing. How does the Bible show how resoundingly Israel defeated the Ammonites? Verse number 11. Alright. So they completely demolished the army that they were so defeated that you couldn't find two of the enemy in any one given place at the same time. So when God has his hand in it, there is an ultimate victory that you can see and understand. Number 14, what can we take away from the details of this account concerning the church? I think we've kind of talked about most of it in that sense. Having a week to work with, making the call, getting the people to respond, being done, and accomplished in such a quick, efficient fashion. The church can do that as well if we put our minds to it, whatever the particular situation may be. It's just a matter of putting our minds to it and working together. 15. Why did some of the Israelites want to kill other Israelites?
Didn't agree with it.
All right. Specifically, what had they done? All right. Well, they had not gone to the battle. They had said, we're not going to have Saul to rule over us. Who was the one that got the credit for this victory? Saul. Because he was the one that cut up the oxen and sent them all throughout all of Israel and said, you get down here and help. And so they went down and they had this ultimate victory, a massive victory. And who was the leader? It wasn't God. It was Saul. Of course, we understand that it was God. We understand that he was the one that was behind it and caused it. But who was the one that the people were looking at and looking to as far as the leader was concerned? Saul. And so here we go back and we look at when Saul was made king, we had this group of people that said, he's not going to rule over us. And that's the ones that they wanted to get. They wanted to go back and say, all right, so you are not going to honor the king, you're not going to serve the king, we're going to kill you. And Saul stepped up and said, no, this is not going to happen. God has wrought a marvelous victory, and there's not going to be any death brought about at this time. What was done at Gilgal, verse number 14. All right. Samuel called it the renewing of the kingdom. If you go through the last lesson that we had, God told Samuel to go, or that Saul was coming and that he was to meet with him and he was to anoint him king. At that point, Saul became the king. Who knew it? Only God, Samuel, and Saul. All right after that, Samuel gets together and says that God has given you a king, and they go through and they draw lots. They take the tribes and go through. Then they take the families from the tribe of Benjamin. Then they go to the house of Kish, and they go down, and finally they pick Saul. And so by lottery, or by lot, Saul is picked by king. All of the nation of Israel knew that at this time. And after this happened, Samuel says, okay, everybody go back to your homes. And so Saul had been made king, he'd been anointed, he'd been shown to the people, but yet there was not a consolidation under Saul. And then this third thing, God shows that Saul is the king because he gives him the power to stand up against the enemies. And this is when Saul actually becomes the unified king under all the people. The renewing of the kingdom was everybody swore their allegiance, they made him king, and he became the power that God meant for him to have as far as the sole king in the United Kingdom of Israel at that time. So that's the process that took place. It was a slow process, but God made sure that the king was the one that he wanted at that time, and that everybody understood it, that everybody served under him. How can we relate to the events of the verse 15 today? If you would like to, verse 15 says, "And all the people went to Gilgal, and there they made Saul king before the Lord in Gilgal, and there they sacrificed sacrifices and peace offerings before the Lord, and there Saul and all the men of Israel rejoiced greatly." Can we relate to that as a church? If we can, how?
We need to worship because of God's protection.
All right.
Rejoice for it as well.
Good.
Rejoice for it as well.
All right. The great victory, the king that had provided the victory, they honored him. They rejoiced. Can we relate to that at all as far as the church? We have a great victory because of Christ. And we can honor and rejoice in. There was worship going on at this time. They were honoring God because of the king and because of the victory. What do we do in worship? We're doing basically the same thing in worship. We're honoring God and praising God for the victory that we have in Christ. Hope of salvation. So they are similar in that respect. All right, we've got about 5 minutes. Let's run through real quickly. First, chapter number 13. 19, question number 19 in Samuel's address. In 19 we have, I think, and it doesn't say specifically that, 12, doesn't say this is the renewing of the kingdom, but here Samuel addresses the people after Saul has been put on the throne basically by everybody, and this is the events that take place, or what Samuel says to the people after the establishment of the kingdom under Saul. First question says in question number 19, in Samuel's address to the people, what did he have them to confirm concerning his dealings with them? That's verses 1 through 5. You'll read that, Curtis? Chapter 12, 1 through 5.
Samuel said unto all Israel, behold, I have hearkened to your voice, and all that ye said unto me, and have made a king over you. And now, behold, the king walks before you, and I am old and gray-headed. And behold, my sons are with you, and I have walked before you from my childhood unto this day. Behold, here I am, witness against me before the Lord, and before his anointed. Whose ox have I taken, or whose ass have I taken, or whom have I defrauded? Whom have I oppressed, or of whose hand have I received any bribe, to blind mine eyes wherewith? And I will restore it to you. And they said, Thou hast not defrauded us, nor oppressed us, neither hast thou taken aught of any man's hand. And he said unto them, The Lord is witness against you, and his anointed is witness this day, that ye have not found aught in my hand. And they answered, He is witness.
All right. How are things going right now in Israel? How are things going with the king? Great. Everything was good. Is everything always going to go good? No. There's going to be problems. When problems start happening, what do people tend to do? Look for people to blame. All right? Samuel, you dirty dog. You gave us this king, and he ain't doing what he's supposed to do, and now look at us. Samuel wanted them to know explicitly and exactly how they went about getting the king, that it was nothing that he had done. There was no reason for him to be blamed for anything that happened there, that they were the ones that made the decisions, and that they were the ones that were to be held accountable for whatever happened with them and their king. And that's true of us as well. We are accountable for all the decisions that we make. The choices we make, we cannot blame anybody else, whether it be our mother and father, or the boss, or whoever we want to. The decisions that we make, we're going to be accountable for them in the good times and in the bad times as well. All right, I guess we'll have to stop there. Looks like we've about wrapped up. We'll try to touch on that next week. Next week we'll be going through 1 Samuel 13, 14, and 15. If you'd like to read that before we get here, kind of give a little bit of background. Sometimes it's kind of hard to get through all the reading and the questions as well. But if you want to just kind of familiarize yourself with that, that'll help a little bit. We'll be looking at the last part of 12 and then focusing mainly on 13, 14, and 15. Jeremy, you got a song to take that? Hymn of invitation will be 255 here in just a minute. 255. Announcements that need to be made before we have the extension of the Lord's invitation. I had one and it's slipped my mind. So I have to with you later on this. I said I had an announcement I needed to make, but I forgot.
What will you be studying next time?
Next week we'll be studying 1 Samuel 13, 14, and 15. Got that?
Right there.
Anybody familiar with Brother Rain's situation? I haven't talked to him this week, so I don't know. No, we'll make a call on that. Check on him. Sister Edna doing okay? Others who we need to be reminded of as far as sickness?
Assistant principal's daughter had a kidney transplant today. I don't know all the details, but I think it's likely.
You got a name?
Chapman.
Anyone else?
Put my mom having their cancer.
Found some cancer in Ronald's mother. And so we want to pray for her. your heart. Others?
This is the reason I lived. She was still like the big dude, but she is small and small. Very small.
Anything else? All right. We will be having Bible study at 9:30 Sunday morning. Worship at 10:30. Hope you can be here for that. I wanted to make an announcement as well. We had a request for some help from someone that we knew from Clay County who lived up in Springfield. She's going to be moving back that way. So we have helped her out by having the electricity cut on at her new place in Lafayette. And we're helping a little bit with her deposit on her rent to try to help her out there. So her name is Melanie Peterson. Just want to let you know we helped out a little bit with that. Anything else that we need to make ourselves aware of at this time? Well, thank you so much for being here. I want to let you know that we do appreciate so much your desire to come out and study God's Word and be encouraged to consider things that are eternal in nature. Before we leave, we want to encourage each other to think more deeply about our particular situation. You don't know what's going on in my life to a great degree, and I don't know what's going on in your life to a great degree. But the devil's very strong, and he can get us if we're not careful. And so we want to encourage each other to think seriously about our lives and our relationship with Christ and to make sure that things are right. I ask you and I ask me this question. Are we doubting or are we rejecting the Lord? It says in Matthew chapter 28, verses 16 and 17, then the 11 disciples went away into Galilee, into a mountain where Jesus had appointed them. And when they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. God does not expect you and me to operate just based upon blind faith. He doesn't expect us to do things without looking at the facts and reasoning them out in our hearts and minds and then drawing the right conclusions and then doing what we're required to do. 1 Thessalonians 5 and verse 21 says, prove all things, hold fast to that which is good. God expects us to prove the things that we hold on to because of the evidence. If you look at John chapter 20 and verse 25, we have the account there of Thomas, most notably known as Doubting Thomas. But it says, the other disciples therefore said unto him, we have seen the Lord. But he said unto them, except I shall see his hands, the prints of the nails, and put my finger in the print of the nails, and thrust my hand into his side, I will not believe. And after 8 days, again his disciples were within, and Thomas with them. And then came Jesus to the doors being shut, and stood in the midst, and said, peace be unto you. And then said he unto Thomas, reach hither thy finger, and behold my hands, and reach hither thy hand, and thrust it into my side, and be not faithless, but believing. And Thomas answered and said unto him, my Lord and my God. Thomas had the evidence before him. He saw the nail prints on Jesus. He saw his side, and he believed based upon the evidence. We don't have the opportunity, or never will have the ability to see Jesus' physically resurrected body in this life. We can't have that evidence. So what are we going to draw on to prove to ourselves the truth? So that we will act according to what we're told to do. One strong evidence that we have is the Bible itself. The evidence of inspiration is there. The proof is there. If you look at the fulfilled prophecies about Jesus Christ himself, you can go to the Old Testament and look at Isaiah chapter 7, verses 13 and 14. And there, in that particular passage, 700 years before the coming of Christ, had said that Jesus would be born of a virgin. That's fulfilled in Luke chapter 1, verses 26 through 35. That's just one prophecy that was fulfilled. You could go and you could look at Micah chapter 5 and verse 2, and there it says he would be born in Bethlehem. We are coming to a convocation where people sing about that particular event. Everybody that believes and knows about Jesus knows where he was born, in Bethlehem. The Bible tells us that was fulfilled in Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 through 11. That's 2 right there. You think about the betrayal of Jesus. The Bible says in Psalm chapter 41 and verse 9, that Jesus would be betrayed by a familiar friend, someone that knew him very well. Who betrayed Jesus? One of the 12 apostles, Judas. It was fulfilled in Mark 14, 43 through 49. David wrote almost 1,000 years before Christ came on the scene. And the price that was paid for Jesus in his betrayal, 30 pieces of silver. Zechariah 11, 12 and 13 was fulfilled in Matthew chapter 27, verses 3 through 10. There is evidence for us to believe. God does not expect us to take a leap of faith in being obedient to Jesus Christ. He just expects us to look at the evidence and then believe it and obey it. But it says there that even some people back then doubted who Jesus was, having been there, seen everything, and yet they still doubted. When they looked at the evidence, all of those apostles, except for Judas who betrayed Jesus, when they looked at the evidence and saw the evidence, they changed their lives. They no longer doubted. All of them, except for John, died a death standing up for the fact that they believed that Jesus Christ was the Son of God. They didn't doubt. They didn't reject him. They did what they were supposed to do. But there's something important that we need to look at when we look at our lives. Some people look at the evidence and they say, well, I'm just not sure. I still doubt. But then there are other people who look at the evidence and know, based upon what they see and what they read and the truth of it, they say, well, I doubt. But in reality, it's not a matter of doubt. It's a matter of they don't want to change their lives. They reject the Lord because they like what they're doing and they like how things are going. And that's what I want to ask myself, and I want to ask you tonight. Is it a matter of doubt that you're not doing what Christ would have you to do? Or is it just a matter that you reject Christ being your Lord and you don't want to obey him? Don't be that way. I know that you know what the truth is, and I know that you know what you need to do. You need to make a change in your life. Becoming a Christian, being obedient to what Jesus said to do to become a Christian, being baptized in the name of Christ for the remission of your sins. Or as a child of God, if you've got sin in your life, it needs to be cleansed by the blood of Jesus, by repenting of that, confessing it, and praying God for forgiveness. I don't believe for a minute that there's doubt in this room. The only thing that would cause anybody in this room not to do what they need to do is because they are rejecting what Christ commands them to do. We're going to implore you, don't be that way. You need to make your life right. I hope that you'll do it right now while together we stand and while we sing.
I am resolved no longer to linger, charmed by the world's delight. Things that are higher, things that are nobler, things that will put my side. Our vision hasten to him, hasten so glad and free, hasten glad and free. Jesus, Jesus, greatest, highest, I will come to thee. I am resolved to enter the kingdom, leaving the paths of sin. Friends may oppose me, foes may beset me, still will I enter in. Hasten to him, hasten so glad and free, hasten glad and free. Jesus, Jesus, great
those that are sick, they rest today and turn on good health. To advance others, especially on good health. Watch over and guide us until next Sunday meeting.